RPGs are an old favourite of many, and for a lot of us, those old RPGs made up a huge chunk of our childhoods, and some even were the games that dragged them into the gaming world to begin with. Of course, there are a huge amount of RPGs, both Western and Japanese, but there are 5 of my personal best RPGs. To include all of my favourites would make this list far too long, so here is but a small sampling of my personal favourites. And let's begin with an absolute classic, that being Final Fantasy IX. Most people would probably put Final Fantasy X or 7 as their favourite out of the Final Fantasy franchise, but for me, it will always be 9. While Final Fantasy X and 7 are great games, I find the characters and world of Final Fantasy IX more interesting. There's quite the mix of characters here on both the hero and villain side. The anthropomorphic designs of many of the characters make them truly visually unique, and they each have an interesting arc alongside that. Also, in my opinion, the villain in this one is stronger than the one in Final Fantasy X as well, even if that does fall down a bit in the end thanks to the decision from Square to throw in a random final boss for funsies. But despite that, there is quite a lot to be had here, from the interesting ATB combat to the interesting stories and characters, and the well fleshed out world. Let's jump ahead many years to The Witcher 3 Wild Hunts. Now this game can't seem to get enough praise, and rightly so. Not only are CD Projekt Red, a fantastic developer, have given away a bunch of free DLC alongside some excellent paid expansions, in my opinion The Witcher 3 is the pinnacle of their Witcher franchise. This entry into the series refined several of the core mechanics into something a bit more approachable, as well as just being more enjoyable to play. Couple this with the well-written dialogue, painstaking detail to facial animations, an extraordinarily detailed world, and an interesting story, and you have the foundations and the flesh of a RPG that will truly stand the test of time, making the main quest and side quests as interesting as the ones in The Witcher 3, and coupling that with a card game that was so good it now has a game of its own, and the interesting world and story is something that is not easily achieved. Next up is the classic Dark Souls. Oh, Dark Souls, a truly refreshing breeze of bitterly cold, unforgiving air. While this series is definitely not for everyone with its unforgiving difficulty, it truly is an original game. That's not to say Dark Souls is gimmicky though, not at all. Just at the time, there wasn't anything quite like it, aside from, of course, its predecessor, Demon Souls. There are many things that make this game unique, and the main factor compared to the rest of the games on this list is that you can beat it without leveling if you have the skill. Unlike most RPGs where you just hit a wall if you haven't leveled enough, the only true barrier here is your skill. If you're good enough, you can make it without leveling, you can make it without armor. It's all down to you. Also, the story is very much murky and hidden under the surface. Anyone wanting to discover the world and lore will have to find it in conversations, item descriptions, and the world itself. This method of storytelling builds a sense of mystery, and the staggering difficulty couples with that to build an ominous tone of dread and, of course, mystery, and sparking curiosity in the player. Even to this day, this game still stands true and will always be remembered in my mind as truly revolutionary. Next up is Mass Effect, and this is something a bit more traditional, but of course we still have one of the finer examples of Western RPGs here. Now, while the combat in the first game in this particular trilogy is showing its age quite a bit these days, it's still worth a look back at. Now, the menus are a bit clunky and tend to get in the way. It wasn't enough to make the universe on offer not interesting, at least to me. There are all sorts of interesting alien races to discover and talk to, and an absolute ton of lore to go alongside it. There are the usual hints of old conflicts and bad blood between species, as well as the plethora of quests where you delve into the microcosms of each place you land, further fleshing out the world as you discover the story. Now, some would argue that Mass Effect 2 refined the clunkier mechanics and made the world and character exploitation take a cleaner and clearer focus due to the extra frustrations which were missing from this particular iteration. This one still has a place in my heart, for I still remember the joy of discovery when I first put in that Mass Effect disc back in the day. Speaking of showing its age, Here's System Shock 2. This game is sadly a bit incomprehensible, especially these days, in the age of more refined, easier to grasp RPGs. For example, the levelling system and the level of complexity is a pretty large ask, and the fact that you need a wiki open to truly play this game doesn't really work in its favour. Yet, despite the years the game is wearing like a belt made out of anchors, this is still a classic game that in many ways hasn't been matched. From the start, the game begins dismantling your hope by severely limiting your resources and making sure that you're aware that any missteps could cost you dearly. This, of course, is truly brought to its pinnacle by the insane AI Showdown, whose reveal truly plays your expectations, and from there, she only helps pile on the dread. Combine this with the almost living being of the ship Von Braun, you not only have a challenging classic RPG, you also have one with some well-realised survival horror elements. In a world where even levelling up is a risk-reward, System Shock 2 truly takes away all meaning of hope. So there you have it. There are 5 of my personal favourite RPGs from pretty much any generation that you could name. As I said, I love RPGs. I have quite the collection. To name all the ones that I enjoy would be far too lengthy. But I've got a good sampling here for you guys to enjoy, and I want to hear some thoughts from you guys. Do you agree with my choices, disagree? What games did you have in place of some of the ones I have here? Let me know your thoughts and opinions. As always, your support is highly appreciated. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.